Hey everyone, today we're going to be taking a sculpt from Nomad into ProCreate the appropriate way, by way of Nomad, doing AutoUVs in Nomad. Nomad just released the 1.62 update with AutoUVs in there, which basically makes my last Ryu video moot. This is the real way to do it. And the good news is the auto UV function in Nomad seems to work way better than Forger. So really exciting stuff all around. So I wanted to kind of push the sculpt and push the painting. I'm going to do kind of a hand-painted model character, kind of in the style of Arcane. I don't know if you've seen Arcane on Netflix. Amazing show, absolutely brilliant visuals. A lot of people kind of compare it to Spider-Verse, kind of the hand-painted textures of Spider-Verse. So I wanted to kind of challenge myself with that. And what better character to take on some really fun painting techniques than with Bob Ross. So, of course, it doesn't look like Bob Ross right now because we are missing his signature afro. I am looking at a reference on my iPhone. This is a sped up video. I ended up spending about 3 hours on this project, maybe just a little over 3 hours. But really, I want to show off just kind of the workflow of going from Nomad to ProCreate. I'm not doing anything particularly difficult here. I started with a sphere and just used the move tool and the clay brush tool to start working out the face. I use my sharp brush, which again you can find on my YouTube shorts, to work in the details of the face, such as the beard and the wrinkles. Use the clay brush tool a lot for the beard hairs. I voxel remeshed a cylinder into the sphere to get the neck. I also just use a UV sphere that I push and pulled around and use the inflate tool to kind of get the little lumps on the afro. I'm doing the collar and shirt similar to the way I do on my Bugs Bunny video, where I do a cylinder and I trim it just like you see here into a triangle and cut it out. Now you can see it went back and forth. I actually had a few crashes here in this process, so I ended up having to do this part a couple of times. Honestly, this is the first time I've really dealt with crashes in Nomad, so not sure why that's happening. But I got through it, and it's always good practice. As frustrating as it is to go and redo something, the way to look at it is, hey, at least it's going to be better this time. It's good practice to do. So you see I used another sphere and used that to create the other part of the shirt. This is just going to be a bust, so I'm not doing his arms. Bob's a really fun character. He's got a lot of personality. He's a bit of a character, a cartoon character in real life, so this is gonna be a lot of fun. I decided to give him a bit of a wild expression. So once I was happy with the face, I turned off symmetry and went in with the move tool to try to give him a lot of interest and attitude. For what it's worth, after going through this, I think Bob Ross would make a really good Fortnite character. If anyone in the audience knows anyone that can make that happen, let's see that happen. We'd love to see Bob Ross fighting with a huge paintbrush weapon in Fortnite. It'd be a lot of fun. Be a good chance to hop back on Fortnite and enjoy it. So consider this my submission for a new character in Fortnite. We'd love to see it happen. Epic, if you're out there listening, that would be amazing. So I wanted to give a little bit more design in his afro. So I used the clay brush tool here and made little kind of jagged spirals, just to have a little bit of fun with it. And I turned off symmetry to do that. I definitely want a lot of asymmetry in this. You'll see I use the flatten tool to really sharpen up the features, especially on his neck and his collar and even on his cheeks there. And now I'm using the move sharp to pull out spikes in his beard. I think those things are pretty similar to what you'll see in stuff like Spider-Verse and Arcane. They use a lot of crisp, hard edges. So I get those here in the sculpt, and they'll just be accentuated by the paint. So I imagine if Bob Ross was a character, he needs a big weapon in Fortnite. And of course that's going to be a paintbrush. So I'm going to get a paintbrush here. Unfortunately, once you leave Nomad, go into ProCreate, you can't go back. I really would have liked to, once this was all said and done, maybe added a palette behind him as well. Maybe done some stuff like that, but maybe I'll hold off until Nomad allows the ability to import UV painted models, because man, that would be a lot of fun to go in and add just a little bit more to this. So here he is. And now we're doing the new thing where we go into the geometry tab and hit UV auto unwrap. Now before I did this, I went in and did a nice decimation to each portion of the character. And you can see up there in the geometry tab, it tells you like how many 1,000 polys you're using. I didn't want to use millions of polys. It's possible my iPad could have handled it, but the last thing I wanted to deal with was more crashes. So it just made sense to kind of decimate it to a reasonable level before then doing the auto UVs. So once I've gone through, done the auto UV on each section, I just export it as an OBJ into ProCreate. And once again, I couldn't be more happy with the auto UV algorithm in Nomad. It makes for actually very few UV islands. If you guys aren't familiar with UVs and the concept of UVs, it's kind of like skinning a character or whatever. Like if you can imagine a hunter or whatever would skin an animal, they'd lay their hide flat. That's kind of what you do when you UV a model. The only thing is, when we'd been doing that in Forger, when it would auto UV, it would create lots of tiny little islands, which kind of becomes a pain if you want to even paint on the 2D texture map. But Nomad's algorithm keeps the islands really few and far between while still minimizing much stretching on the texture. So again, I'm just really thrilled with how well that worked. There are some parts when I painted on this model that had a hard time, like the paintbrush wouldn't really reach it, but really there weren't very many of those, which means there were probably overlapping UVs. And you'll actually see it here at the top of the brow. You can see where the black paint doesn't quite touch the part I'm trying to paint. Again, there aren't very many of those. So I suppose I'll talk a little bit about my paint process. Like I mentioned, I'm watching Arcane on Netflix right now, and it's absolutely phenomenal and really inspiring to want to do more hand-painted work. So I'm going to do my best attempt to kind of ape their style. But in order to do that, the first thing you need to do is you got to create a layer where you just block in the basic colors. So a really easy way to do that in ProCreate is you just select the model you want, and then you can just grab that color swatch on the top right and just drag it onto the model, and it will fill the model. I believe you can also click on Layer, Fill Object, but it's a little bit faster. Just click on the swatch and drag it onto the object. Once I've done that, I do need to kind of hand paint some bits that are, part of the same mesh. And so I'm doing that here. One of the things you typically see with kind of the Arcane style, when people are doing the hand-painted digital look, is they use a really kind of squarish brush. So in ProCreate, I went to my brush settings and I hit shape, and I went to import source library, and I chose a hexagon shape because there wasn't a square one already in there. I could have built one, but hexagon really achieves those sharp edges I'm looking for anyways. I set my Apple Pencil pressure to the opacity and just a little bit to the size on it. And I also made sure the material wasn't affecting roughness or metallic. If you guys want to see a little bit more in depth of like a brush setting in ProCreate, let me know, and I could do a YouTube short of that. So once I've got the overall colors in, I then really lightly go in and start working in some shade and highlight. So I choose kind of a darker, more red color of the skin. And you can see here I'm going through and working in some shadows in the shadow areas, kind of painting in kind of the ambient occlusion areas. Another common technique you'll see when people do that is sometimes you get a really contrasty color and you just paint it in sort of a gradient on the model, and then you go and you just color pick the in-between areas of those gradients. Grant Abbott is a really talented modeler artist on YouTube, and I encourage you to check out his tutorials on stylized painting. He's got some really great ones, really easy to understand. I'd love to see Grant Abbott take a crack at doing some Procreate painting. I think that'd be a really fun video to watch. But in the meantime, this is me trying to do it myself. Also using like the pencil tool. I love the pencil tool on Procreate. Just go in to get some more darker outlines. So here, just really want to accentuate the lines on the lips. You know, if I were pulling this model back in Procreate, I could rely on the curvature rendering. It's a really cool post-processing feature in Nomad. But what I ended up doing is, once this model was all painted and finished, I sent it on to Sketchfab. Sketchfab has a very similar kind of rendering setup process to Nomad, extremely similar. Unfortunately, the Sketchfab's interface on the iPad isn't all that great. It's hard to kind of move the dials around. So I'll also give a shout out to anybody from Sketchfab. If you're watching this video and you're listening, we would love to now have a Sketchfab app on the iPad that would be dedicated to uploading models like from Procreate and dialing those in, because right now there's no way to really get those cool rendering features unless Nomad will provide a way to import UV texture models back in. We're left with maybe doing it with Sketchfab, which is also an awesome option, because then we can let other people download the model and inspect it. But right now, as it is, I got to go to my computer to do that, to really dial in that model. So just a plea to Sketchfab. If any of you devs are out there, they would be fantastic, because we know there's a lot of people creating painted Procreate models right now. And Sketchfab just seems like an obvious choice for a way to upload that and show it off. So for the most part, I'm using that same brush, kind of going around here and adding detail. I am creating layers. I'm not doing a lot with blend modes. A little later on, I'll go in and I'll add some overall shadows and highlights, in which I will use blend modes. You know, using like a darken blend mode on the shadows and a lighten blend mode on the highlights. I did layer the teeth. I don't know if you saw that, but I did paint a layer for the teeth so I could alpha lock that layer and do the shading on the teeth without it blending over into the lips. So a little tip there. Here I got a lighter color to accentuate the spirals in his hair. Awesome feature in Procreate is I can easily throw on a color in a layer and then switch to hue saturation and dial in that color. A lot of people keep asking, why would you paint in Procreate when you can paint in Nomad? Well, you can't do hue saturation or blur or filter effects in Nomad, and the brush engine isn't near as cool and developed as it is in Procreate. Doesn't feel as good. There's a lot of reasons. Not to mention blending modes and layers and that sort of fun stuff. You know, at the end of the day, Procreate is a dedicated painting app, and Nomad is a dedicated sculpting app, and they should continue to stay that. There's no reason one of these apps should do everything, because they'll end up doing a lot of stuff mediocre. And instead, let them excel at what they do, but find some happy ways to bridge the two. So now I'm hopping in, painting in shadows and highlights. If you look at the Arcane style, there's a lot of that. Just painted highlights, painted shadows. Now they are using some fancy shader work. In the meantime, we won't have the luxury of doing that, but that's all right, because this character is not really moving throughout shadows and lighting, so we can just paint it all in and be happy with it. A lot of people forget when you paint the eyes, you know, well, a lot of people remember to do highlights, really pronounced highlights, but a lot of people forget to do the shadows in the whites of the eye. I think that's a really unique thing that really helps eyes look better. So I've got that shadow that's under that top lid in there. Really, what you're not seeing here is, as I'm pulling up references of Arcane on my phone, just so I can kind of get some tips and tricks. Here I use the splatter brush to create some freckles. Put the splatter brush on a different layer, and I did end up switching that, I think, to a multiply. Just pulled down the intensity on that. Continuing to push contrast, push the darkness, push the highlights on the model. Here you can see I'm going back up under the hair with an even darker shadow color. I start off a little timid when I do shadows and highlights. It's kind of the way I work. I know some people like to work with the model all the way dark and then just paint in highlights. I've done that before. This is just kind of the way that works for me. Now here you can see I painted a light color on his afro, and I'm messing with some blend modes to kind of get some fake lighting in there. Another thing that, again, cannot be done painting in Nomad. And here I'm playing with some different brushes. This was one of the abstract brushes on the curls. I didn't really end up liking this one. I found another one that had more of a rake sort of texture that I ended up going to. This is it here. And I just switched the pressure to where it wasn't making the brush smaller, but it was just fading out the brush. Went in and I do just a lot of color picking here. Once I've got in the main values and kind of palette that I like in the hair, then it's just a matter of color picking what you like and painting in, color pick, painting it in. Finally, my character is looking a little bit too young, so I want to make sure it gets some pronounced gray hairs in there. So switch to the pencil tool and start adding in some gray hairs. This character was a lot of fun, such a good fit for the subject of painting in ProCreate. And so here in a little bit, I'm going to get a little crazy and start adding some really fun brush work and just get a little messy with it. And, you know, just happy little accidents, right? Just the Bob Ross way. Happy accidents. So here we've got some splattery paint. You know, Bob wouldn't have had his shirt clean all the time. Sometimes he liked to get a little crazy, fling paint places. So you get it on his face, on his nose. Again, this is the fun stuff of having layers, being able to play around and have some cool brushes at your fingertips. Get that paint everywhere. All right, and now I'm going and using similar techniques here on the brush in the back. I won't get too detailed here on this brush because I don't want it to compete detail-wise with the main subject. And here, this is kind of me emulating some Arcane shader type stuff. So I'm using a splattery airbrush to paint in some shadow and highlights. And I'm just using some blue, and I switch it to like a darken mode, pull the opacity down to taste. And then I do similar thing here with the highlights, with some really yellow orangey highlights on it. Just messing with blend modes and messing with opacity. Another great thing is the smudge tool. I use that here and there. Anytime you have some colors aren't quite lining up where you want, just use that smudge tool. So instead of saying Bob Ross, this is Rob Boss. This is his alter ego in the virtual world. Rob Boss. Again, coming to Fortnite, I could only hope and dream. Maybe he'll be a playable character in the future. This final render was done in Sketchfab. I've got a link here, and you can go check out the model yourself, see it in 3D. And if you like, I've got it to where you can download it, and you can even download it to your iPad and give it your own custom paint job. Sketchfab's great for viewing and distributing models like that. Anyways, I hope this was helpful. Hope you liked it. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.